So we're gathered together in honor of the Mitteler Rebbe, second Rebbe of Chabad. And there are basically three things connected to today and yesterday. Yesterday marks the day that the Mitteler Rebbe was born, Yom Haledes. And it's also the day that the Mitteler Rebbe was nostalgic, the day that he passed. Exact same day, at the exact age of 54 years old. And today is the Chag HaGula. Today is the day that the Mitteler Rebbe went out of jail. You know, the Alter Rebbe was in jail once, and then he was in jail a second time. The Mitteler Rebbe was in jail and was released from jail miraculously. The Frierdiker Rebbe was in jail and was released from jail miraculously. And the truth is that the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, and the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, they were also all arrested in Russia at different times. But they weren't in a jail, they were in house arrest, which means that they were constricted, confined to a place. But all the Rebbes of Chabad were arrested. The Frierdiker Rebbe did better than all of them. He was arrested 7 times. So I once heard from a chassid, Rabbi Groner from Australia, who was there, I think, at the time. To understand and appreciate this, there's a term in halacha that there's certain things that everyone is obligated to do, and there's certain things that only if you're on a certain level do you do that. Otherwise, it looks like you're boasting. It looks like you're trying to show off. So the term in halacha for that is mirze kiyuara. It looks like you're showing off, so don't do it. So this chassid was sitting by the table with the previous Rebbe, celebrating Yud Beis Tammuz, the day that he went out of jail. Like I said, it was the 7th time that he was arrested. So he said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, no, to get arrested once or twice, that's a custom of the Chabad Rabbein. But 7 times, that's showing off already. That's mirze kiyuara. He definitely got the Frierdiker Rebbe to left. So the only difference is that the other Rebbes, they were house arrest, even though it was also very serious. The Mitteler Rebbe was actually arrested in jail for almost 2 months. And today we're celebrating, so today we don't say Tachnun. And I want to try to squeeze in the little bit of time we have, talk about the birth, talk about the passing, and talk about the Chag HaGula, and in general about the life of the Mitteler Rebbe. So first of all, just a general statement about the Mitteler Rebbe and about the Rebbes of Chabad, that even though all the Rebbes of Chabad are one golden chain, and each Rebbe only furthered and advanced more what was taught by the Rebbe before him, and we see tremendous consistency, very different than in other Hasidic dynasties, where there was a Rebbe, and then his student branched off, and each one of the students, or a lot of them, became Rebbes in their own way. And each one, even though they were students, but they took the path of their Rebbe in a little bit in a different direction, a little bit. And in Chabad, we do see a tremendous consistency from one Rebbe to the next. It's one line, but nevertheless, each Rebbe was unique, and each Rebbe introduced something which was different than the generation before. Not because he disagreed, and not because he had his own opinion, but because that was the time for Hasidus to take on a new dimension. And every generation, it moved forward in a different way. So one of the main differences between the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe, even though he was his son, very connected to his father, but the Alter Rebbe, when he gave over Hasidus, it was given over more or less in a brief way. A maimer of the Alter Rebbe, relatively speaking, compared to the Mitteler Rebbe, was brief. The Mitteler Rebbe, when he said a maimer and explained something, it went on sometimes for hours. And to the extent that the Frierdiker Rebbe said he once asked an older chassid, who I think asked the chassid of the previous generation, what was the longest that he ever said a maimer on a Shabbos? And the answer was 17 hours. 17 hours, which is like a wellspring, is a little bit of water that flows from the ground. But if it keeps flowing, it could become a river, and the river could spread and stretch for miles. and be so much wider and so much longer than the original wellspring. So the Alter Rebbe is compared to the wellspring, and the Mitteler Rebbe is compared to the river. The Alter Rebbe is compared to Chochmah, and the Mitteler Rebbe is compared to Bina. Also in Yiddish, they said about the Mitteler Rebbe, I think the Tzemach Tzedek said, that the Mitteler Rebbe, I'll say it first in Yiddish, then I'll explain it. Macht von a Wort a Quart. A quart is what you use to wash your hands with. A Wort means one word. So he says he takes one word of the Alter Rebbe and he makes a whole quart out of it, which means basically one word of the Alter Rebbe becomes a whole gallon or ton of water. So that was the difference between him. And it says about the Mitteler Rebbe, even though his knowledge in Torah in general was vast, and they say that when he went into the shul was a long shul, and they would call it the Hodu Aleinu shul, which means you can start saying Hodu when you walk in, and if you keep davening, by the time you get to the other end of it, you can be up to Aleinu. So they say when the Mitteler Rebbe went to his place in the shul, he was able to go over in his mind an entire tractate of Gemara. So his knowledge was in all areas of Torah, but he had a specific passion for Hasidus, which is even considered extreme and stands out even compared to the other Rebbes of Chabad. That he had a very strong passion. His whole chayis was Hasidus. And one of the famous things are, again, that Tzemach Tzedek said, Tzemach Tzedek was his nephew, and Tzemach Tzedek was his son-in-law, the third Rebbe. And he said that with my father-in-law, if you would cut his finger, you wouldn't see blood flowing, you'd see Hasidus flowing, because his very life was Hasidus. And the Rebbe once said that it was very young. In those days, people got married young, so that part was normal. But naturally, you walk over to the young man and you say, so we're starting to look out for you for a shidduch. What are you interested in? You have to give a list. And his answer was, the first shidduch that comes up, just grab it. Because I know that by the L'chaim, the Alter Rebbe is going to say a maimer. And he couldn't wait to hear a maimer Hasidus from the Alter Rebbe. So everything else doesn't really matter. I just want to get that maimer. So most Bachrim today are not up to that, but that was the Mitteler Rebbe. And this is this will soon be obvious from other things that I'll tell you. But where am I going to start with? I can start with the birth. I can start with the stalkas. I can start with the Chagagula. So I think I'll start with the birth. When the Mitteler Rebbe was born, the Alter Rebbe gave him the name Duber, and that was a name after his Rebbe, which was the Maggid Mezrich. There's a story behind it, that when the Maggid Mezrich was sick, and that was a year, Maggid Mezrich passed away a year before the Mitteler Rebbe was born. The Alter Rebbe was at his bedside, and the Alter Rebbe was attending to him, as all the students were, but the Alter Rebbe was one of them. And the Alter Rebbe asked him for a bracha for a son. He was married for 14 years. He had daughters, but had no son. And the Mezrich Maggid promised him that he'll have a son next year. And he told him, don't forget about my name, which means you should give him a name after the Maggid Mezrich. And not only that, he also told him certain details. When a baby boy is born, on the Friday night before the bris, there's something called the Shalom Zacher, which means people come to the house and they come to bless the child, and there's some refreshments on the table, but there's more to it. And he told him a lot of the deeper meaning and what to do and how to conduct yourself on this Shalom Zacher, preparing him that he's going to have a boy, and the boy should be named after the Mitteler Rebbe. So that's in fact the name of the Mitteler Rebbe is Duber, the same name as the Maggid Mezrich. Now the Mitteler Rebbe was also the first one to move into the city of Lubavitch. We know that Hasidic Chabad are either called Hasidic Chabad or Lubavitch. Chabad is the philosophy, that our philosophy is to learn Hasidus in depth. So we called Hasidic Chabad Chochmah, Bina, and Dat, which are the three aspects of the intellect. But the city we lived in was a city called Lubavitch, and it's in White Russia. And therefore, the Hasidim also called Lubavitch Hasidim. In fact, all the names of Hasidim are basically because of the cities. You heard the name Belz Hasidim because it came from a city called Belz. Satmar Hasidim, they come from a city called Satmar. Kloisenberg Hasidim come from a city called Kloisenberg. Every group of Hasidim, they come from a certain city. Like someone told me that for many years, until one day she had a surprise, but for many years she understood that the Frierdiker Rebbe came from a city called Frierdik. Frierdiker Rebbe is a Yiddish word that means the previous Rebbe, because people for many years had the previous Rebbe as the Rebbe. Then our Rebbe became the Rebbe, so they couldn't say the word the Rebbe said. Which Rebbe? The one, the father-in-law, the son. So they said the previous Rebbe or the present Rebbe. But she thought Frierdik, like every other name, it's the name of a city called Frierdik. So when did Lubavitch become the headquarters of Chabad? It was after the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, and the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic in a very, very crucial time. That time the war was going on between Russia and France, Napoleon and the Tsar, and that's a discussion in itself. In the month of Tevis, next month, will be the yahrtzeit of the Alter Rebbe. We'll tell that story because it's connected to the Alter Rebbe's passing. And Alter Rebbe ran away from Russia and was traveling for a few months, which actually led to his passing. He became very sick. And after that, the Lubavitch Hasidim didn't have a place. So at first, the Mitteler Rebbe was in a city which is in Ukraine called Kremenchuk. And then he settled in the city of Lubavitch. And actually, Lubavitch has a history. The Alter Rebbe, when he was a child, used to study with a special teacher in the city of Lubavitch. So when the Mitteler Rebbe came there, he moved in on the Chai Elul, and shortly after the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic that year. And he approached a certain spot. There was a house that burned down. And he said, in this spot, my father, the Alter Rebbe, studied with his teacher 58 years ago. And in this city, in this spot, we're going to rebuild Chabad. And since then, Lubavitch was called Lubavitch Hasidim. And after the outbreak of World War I, that's when the Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch, and then Lubavitch went to... So all the Rebbes, really, up until the previous Rebbe, were in the city of Lubavitch. The previous Rebbe started his leadership in a different city. It started off in a different city in Russia, and then he went to Poland, then came to America, and of course the Rebbe began here in America. Now, we know that in those days, there was tremendous opposition against Hasidus. In the early generations, there was a very big misunderstanding. This is not opposition that came from ordinary people. This was opposition that was coming from learned people, scholars, Torah scholars, but they were sure that this was a revival of an old movement, which goes against Yiddishkeit, movement, which was led by someone called Shabtai Tzvi, a Messianic movement. And they were sure that this is a continuation and a revival. So they fought it, and they unfortunately didn't do the proper research to realize that this is something different. It took a long time till it became understood and realized. So at that time, that's what led to the arrest. But at that time, there was a tremendous opposition. So when the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, and the Mitteler Rebbe had to become the new Rebbe, the people who, in those days, by the way, the opposition wasn't just everybody was opposed. There was an actual organized committee that their function was to fight Hasidus.
Wow.
It was an organized committee, and they had people all different places doing different activities. So when they heard the Alter Rebbe was nostalgic, they had a meeting, and they decided the Alter Rebbe was a very dynamic person. The Mitteler Rebbe was known to be a much softer person. Didn't have, according to them, didn't have that powerful, dynamic leadership. So now's the time to attack. And they made an arrangement that whoever they know in different cities, everyone should sort of aggressively attack and try to destroy the Hasidic movement. And that'll be it. It'll be over, for sure. Without leadership, it'll be over. The Mitteler Rebbe became aware of this. So he gave two instructions to his Hasidim. And as a result of that, they didn't succeed. One instruction was that he absolutely prohibits any Chassid to get into any kind of debate with anyone about the subject of Chassidus, because the debates were so heated, and the intention was not really to understand. The intention was just to ridicule, to knock, to cause the people to be embarrassed of Hasidus and find also just to sort of harass them. So he prohibited them to get. If somebody wants to study Hasidus, great, but if somebody wants to have a debate about the matter, just move away. And on this basis, he actually prohibited his Hasidim to enter into a shul that was the shul that belonged to the opposition. They had to make their own shul, their own minyan. And there's a certain chassid that once said he met someone from those days that for 5 years he didn't walk into a shul because there was no shul in his city, only a shul that belonged to the opposition, and he wasn't able to go in. So this was very strict, that no one was allowed to get into any kind of discussion and argument with anyone about Chassidus. The second thing was that every Chassid who was in Lubavitch came to the Rebbe for the Yontif and heard a mimer. On his way home, he had an obligation. The Rebbe himself charged him with this obligation that wherever he stops off, in every city he passes, is to go into the shul and publicly give over what he heard, the Chassidus that he studied. As a result of these two things, number one, he didn't give an opportunity for people to harass the Chassidim and to ridicule them and to knock them. And on the other hand, he gave the opportunity for people out there to be exposed to Chassidus because wherever they went, they gave over publicly Chassidus. So not only the first year, no damage was done, but it says the first year, there were 15,000 people that became Chassidim. And the year after that, even more. He sort of conquered the entire region. They all became Chassidim. And there's a famous story that is told about a Chassid who lived in Yassi, it's a city in Romania. His name was Rabbi Moshe Yitzchak, that he did what the Mitteler Rebbe told him. He was a young man, he was traveling, stopped off in a city, and he gave over Chassidus. In the middle of speaking, someone walked in. Who was this son? Wasn't an ordinary person. He was a Hasidic Rebbe. And not an ordinary, he was really a tzaddik. He was one of the students of the Maggid, one of the senior students of the Maggid. And he was furious because he idealistically was against teaching Hasidus like Chabad. This is another discussion which we'll have over this month, hopefully more opportunity, that the difference between Chabad and other Hasidim, they study Hasidus, but very brief and very general. If you look at a Hasidic discourse from another Rebbe, it's probably a quarter of a page. If you're lucky, it's a half a page. If you're really drunk, it'll be 2 pages, but that's about it. A mimer of a Rebbe goes on for pages and pages, and especially the Mitteler Rebbe, his mimer could be 20 pages. He said Chassidus for hours. So they were against, not because Chas v'Shalom, any other ulterior motive, just because in principle they were against. It's enough that Chassidus is being revealed, but in such a way to explain it, to elaborate it, to bring it down to everyone on that simple level, that's like a desecration for Chassidus. They were against it. He walks into the shul and he sees a Chabad Chassid in his shul giving over Chassidus Chabad. And he used the term that's found in the Megillah of Esther, that in the story of Esther, Haman fell on Esther, on the bed that she was on, because an angel came and pushed him. And when the king Ahasuerus walked in, he said, "What? You want to conquer my queen with me in the house while I'm here?" And he had him hung. So he said the same words, "You want to conquer my city with me here?" And he cursed him that he shouldn't live till the end of the year. That's a discussion in itself. Why would he do such a thing? Obviously, this to him was considered, he was like sort of a king in this place. This was his kingdom. This was his spiritual divine mission. And he was doing something which was a rebellious act against a king. And I guess a rebellious act deserves such punishment. The chassid was in shock. He knew that this is a tzaddik. And the word that came out of his mouth could, God forbid, lead, like the story with Yaakov. He said, he gave a curse, no matter whoever took those things from Lavan, they shouldn't live. And he actually, because of that, Rachel passed away young. So he ran back to Lubavitch, to the Mitteler Rebbe, and he told him what happened. And basically, he wants the Mitteler Rebbe to take away the curse. So Mitteler Rebbe leaned on his head, and he said to him, "Tell me, is that all that happened, or something else happened? Like, did you sort of answer back disrespectfully or anything?" He said, "No, all I did was what the Rebbe told us to do. I gave over a Maimon Chassidus. That's all." So then the Rebbe said to him, leaned on his forehead, and said, "You'll outlive him." So the chassid stood there and said, "Rebbe, he's an old man. I need a better bracha than that." So the Mitteler Rebbe leaned on his forehead again and said, "You'll outlive his children." So the Rebbe, his children aren't that young either. I need a better bracha than that. So he said, "You'll outlive his grandchildren." And this chassid lived to the age of 104. He was a very big chassid. And he, till the last day of his life, he was in perfect health. All his mind and everything was perfect. He lived 104. And another story from this era was a story that Rebbe told more than once, that there was a chassid that he did what the Mitteler Rebbe told him. Wherever he came, he would give over chassidus. He was very articulate. When he spoke, people were like so mesmerized. They loved what he said. They were so inspired that dozens of people became chassidim as a result of him giving over chassidus. But being that he was a chassid, he was very concerned that it's causing him a feeling of yeshus. It's inflating his ego. So he wanted to stop. And he came to the Mitteler Rebbe and said, "I want to stop doing what I'm doing because this is causing me to feel very good about myself." And that's the opposite of bittul. It's not what a chassid is. So Mitteler Rebbe told him to continue. And he said to him in Yiddish, said, which means even if you turn into an onion, just keep publicizing and spreading chassidus. Meaning to say, even though you're becoming an onion, you're becoming a yesh. Why he chose an onion out of all the vegetables? Nebuch, the poor onion, white onion. Oh, so yeah. First of all, there's a lot of things you can say about an onion. I once heard the Rebbe say that an onion grows different than other vegetables, with the head in the ground, upside down. The head is in the ground. That's not such a compliment. And I heard Hasidim say that onion has a lot of peels. Peels in Hasidus is klipa. So normally, once you peel an apple, you peel the apple. Once you peel an orange, you peel an orange. An onion, you peel and you peel and you peel. It's full of peels. So this was from that time. Talking about time, we didn't even start yet. Okay, we'll go over a little bit and just to cover something. So this was the Mitteler Rebbe. I wanted to talk. Let me talk about the stalkers, the passing of the Mitteler Rebbe. So being that the Mitteler Rebbe, like I said before, was very, very passionate about Chassidus. So we find that, first of all, what would the circumstance led to his passing? And it's interesting that the Mitteler Rebbe is not buried in the city of Lubavitch where he lived. He's buried in a different city called Nezhin. And the reason for that is because the year that he passed away, the Tsar started a new decree. The decree it's known as the Kantonisten, and that is that children from the age of 7 have to be taken away to the army. The official excuse was that in order to have a good soldier, you have to start raising them very young, training them from 7, 8 years old. The hidden agenda was to take Jewish children and convert them to Christianity. He was a big anti-Semite, the Tsar, and this was his way of torturing Jews. Imagine parents losing a child, taking away a child and sending him off to the army. And it was a big dilemma. Parents had to hide their children. Unfortunately, this decree lasted for 25 years. And Tzemach Tzedek was very involved in saving thousands of children from their hands. But the Mitteler Rebbe, this is when it first started. So he went to the city of Haditch, where the Alter Rebbe is buried. It was the Ohel of the Alter Rebbe, to pray and do whatever he can to nullify this decree. And obviously he saw that he wasn't succeeding, wasn't successful. And it looks like this is what led to his illness. He was so aggravated by everything that happened that on the way going home, he became sick. That's why he never came to the city of Lubavitch. He was in a city called Nezhin, and that's where he passed away. And there are many stories about what happened when he passed away. But one of them, which is related to what we said before, was that the doctors said they can't find any medicine for his illness. Maybe they didn't even know what exactly it was. But the doctors basically saw an interesting thing. He so much loved Chassidus, had a passion for Chassidus. There was one point where he was feeling so weak that you couldn't go near him. If you did anything, he would faint. That's how weak he was. And the doctors didn't allow him to say Hasidus because that's a strain. But then one of the doctors said, you want to see something? If we allow him to say Hasidus, you'll see he'll become strong again. And that's what happened. They said, we're giving you permission to say Hasidus. This was something that gave him such physical life that he actually got the strength to get up. And he said Hasidus. And he revealed, before his passing, he revealed deep things in Hasidus that weren't revealed throughout his entire lifetime. And in fact, the Tzemach Tzedek said that the passing of his father-in-law, the Mitteler Rebbe, was similar to Rabbi Shloma Bar Yochai. In fact, there was no one that had such a passing since the days of Rabbi Shloma Bar Yochai. And what is it? That night before he passed away, he asked for permission to give over a mimer, which they granted him permission. And he asked that they should give him his Shabbos clothing. He used to wear white on Shabbos, put on that clothing, and he started to say a mimer. And a number of times in the middle, when he said the mimer, you forgot that he was sick. His face was shining, and he was in a different world. And a few times he kept asking, is it dawn already? Is it the break of dawn? And then when it was the break of dawn, he said a mimer on the words, Kimcha Mekir Chaim, Chaya Chaim. And the last word that came out of his mouth was actually the word Chaim, which means life. And that's why a lot of his svarim are called Torah's Chaim. And then he passed away. Tzemach Tzedek said a similar thing happened with Shimon Bar Yochai. Before he passed away, he actually started to reveal secrets of a Kabbalah that he never revealed his whole life. And the last word that came out of his mouth was also the word Chaim, from a different pasuk, from a pasuk which is Kisham Tziv Hashem Etzavrocha Chaim Ad Olam. But again, that was the last word that came out of his mouth. I once heard, it's not in the Sichos, that a very strange thing happened by his funeral, that suddenly the people who were carrying the Mitteler Rebbe couldn't control themselves. They were just running. Their feet were running and racing, and everybody had to run, catch up with them. So the Chassidim said, you know why? The Mitteler Rebbe is so passionate about Chassidus, he stopped the middle of a mimer and is going up there to continue the mimers. He didn't want to wait. So therefore, he was running and he called everybody else to run. Just the way Chassidim knew the Mitteler Rebbe's passion for Chassidus. Now, to talk a little bit about the arrest. So what led to his arrest? Basically, like I said before, it was a time where there was still tremendous opposition, unfortunately coming from Jews that are from Jews. And they thought that they're doing a mitzvah because this is a movement that goes against Yiddishkeit. So they'll get him arrested. It's going to be benefit for Yiddishkeit. But how did they do this? Of course, the same kind of false accusation that he's planning to take over and to make a revolution, become the king, and all sorts of nonsense like that. They actually said that he built a shul that's the same size and dimensions as the Beis Hamikdash, because he wants to rebuild his own royal dynasty. And one day they actually found officers from the government who came measuring the shul to see what the dimensions were, to see if it's really true. But it had to do with the fact that, unfortunately, he was actually a relative of the Mitteler Rebbe, a relative of his, that was part of the team that filed this false accusation against the Mitteler Rebbe. Fortunately, the Mitteler Rebbe was a little bit different than the Alter Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he was taken away in this wagon. It was called the Black Wagon. And there was a wagon that was reserved for people that committed very, very big crimes like treason, people who went against the government. In fact, for most people who went away with this wagon never came back. It was a one-way trip. And the Mitteler Rebbe was different. They allowed him to go to the jail in a more honorable way. So yes, there were guards, armed guards, but at the same time, they allowed the Hasidim to escort him. So there were hundreds of Hasidim escorting him, and the parade became bigger and bigger. And not only that, but when they came to a certain city, Jews and even the non-Jews of the city came out to greet him. In fact, they had a custom, they came out to greet him with bread and salt. And the officers were amazed to see that everyone has amazing respect for him. Here they're accusing him of being a criminal, and here they see that people loved him and respected him. And then finally, when he got to the jail, also it wasn't a jail like the other jail, it was more than a house. And the most incredible thing is that here he was being arrested for spreading Chassidus, but they allowed him to say Chassidus while he was in jail. How did that happen? Because he had a doctor, his name was Dr. Heibenthal. He was a doctor that served the upper class, the noblemen, princes, kings, and he was the personal doctor of the Mitteler Rebbe. And he testified to the Russian government, and he said that this person needs Chassidus to live. So being that everybody that's in prison has rights, and part of the rights are you have to give them bread and water for their survival, his survival is Chassidus, so you have to allow him to say Chassidus. And guess what? They accepted it, and they allowed him. So 3 times a week, 50 people went in to hear the Maimer in the jail where he was arrested. And the 50 people that went in only went in once, which means they drew lots. If you got in once, the next 50 people were different people. So everyone had the opportunity to go into the Mitteler Rebbe and hear a Maimer. And then eventually they brought all the evidence, how the Mitteler Rebbe is really innocent, and these are just people that were jealous of him, and all the complaints, everything they filed was false. In fact, the sort of grand finale was that they wanted to have a sort of what's the word for it? They wanted to have them both in the room together, the Mitteler Rebbe and the Jew that filed the accusation against him, and let them discuss it between each other, and the judge would listen to what they say to each other. And in that discussion, the person who was the one who filed against him and described him as a criminal, as they were talking and he got excited about something, he said, the Rebbe, such and such and such. So the Mitteler Rebbe turned to the judge. Did you hear that? He is the one who's accusing me of being a criminal, and he calls me Rebbe. So you see that he's totally confused. After this, he got totally confused. He started to speak. It was incoherent. He wasn't making sense. And the judge screamed at him, and Mamish said, okay, stop barking. Get out of this place. He's innocent, and you're the one that's guilty. And at the end, the Mitteler Rebbe went out of jail. What day was it? So he was informed that he's going out of jail on Tes Kislev, which is another interesting thing. Tes Kislev is his birthday, is the day of passing, and the day he was informed that he's going out of jail. It was Shabbos. And the day he actually went out was today, Yud Kislev. And Yud Kislev, the Mitteler Rebbe, it's not so clear, but it seems Yud Kislev, when you say the Tillim today, which is we start with chapter 55. In chapter 55, you have the words Pada B'Shalom Nafshi. You know that David HaMelech, all the Rebbes of Chabad are descendants of David HaMelech. And David HaMelech also had a lot of opposition. And his opposition was also coming from family members and from other Jews and rabbis who were against him for whatever reason they had. And eventually, he was the one who sort of was victorious over them. And in this chapter 55, he thanks Hashem for giving him salvation with the words Pada B'Shalom Nafshi. I'm going to pass this around. I'm sure the Madrichot, we have one representative here, is going to eventually teach the girls the niggin for Pada B'Shalom Nafshi. This is the niggin that's ringing in everybody's ears from the beginning of the month till the end of the month. Of course, it's all about Geula of the Alter Rebbe, the Geula of the Mitteler Rebbe, and at the end of the month, the Alter Rebbe went out of jail a second time. And that's the Yom that we celebrate. So, Yehi Ratzon, as if I told you all the other things that are in the middle, which I didn't get a chance to say, but this is a day of celebration. I know, I heard, I know, doesn't help, okay. Maybe it's supposed to be part of the Shalom Nafshi, we just don't get it. Okay. Anyway, so good job to everybody, and it's a special day, take advantage of the day. Today we give extra tzedakah, and we have a brain like we just now had. And in that way, the schus of the tzaddik of this day will help us in our prayers and what we need, each one, the gashmis, the baruchnis. And of course, we want that from this day of redemption, we should come to the big redemption, which is Mashiach. Ignored me. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I had no idea.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, bye.
No, you know what? Some lucky person is gonna get this. Oh, yeah, I told you. Some people are supportive, some people are not. No, you want mine? Here.
You're finished, you want to say next?
You needed her permission.
No, whatever's on your.
I've never put anything there before. Yeah.
Only just if you can crack the table.
Oh, by me.
Shira. Yeah.
Hi, Shira. She's been my class of the day.
Okay, I'll stay up here. I'll hang out maybe. I don't know, I think about something. Okay. But, I want it. Great. Okay, good. Great, I guess I'm or maybe next year, whatever, you know, like I don't have to make what calls. Great, right, exactly. Who's in custody? Maybe be starting with us. Yeah. Yeah. Supposed to happen?
Oh, what was that?
Not good.
Okay, then. One of the stuff. Well, just a picture of the thing itself. Okay, maybe now we're going to how that happens. You get it?
Yay. Thank you.
No problem. Supposed to close them?
This is for the other classroom.
I don't want to touch them, I'm scared. I'm gonna just like turn the whole thing off and then it won't be good. For an hour.
I don't do anything with that one.
Good, okay. slept a bit, and it's fine, Baruch Hashem. So now I am finished, and I'm gonna go to sleep myself right now. So Hashem, worry, darling, Daddy really helped with putting away all the shopping, and I. Hi, how are you?
This time I did not get caught up.
Good for you.
That's so easy to get caught up.
Oh, all the time. How are you? How's it going day by day now?
Actually, it's funny. Today she sent me a long message like about how much she loves me.
Oh, you're
and
welcome.
she's sorry. Yeah, and that she's going to therapy now. And obviously, I'm still upset that she did all that before. Not holding a grudge, but you can't just go from one extreme to another, It goes from complete I'm blocking you, you're out of my life, to I love you, I'm sorry, obviously I'll forgive her, but I can't deal with the bipolarness,
The bipolarness, exactly, and it's not a healthy
and it's
way
very
to be.
extreme. It's not just a little bipolar, it's hot and cold.
I don't know if you're able to, yeah, sure. Oh, I turned off the video. Is that okay or what?